everybody, and welcome back to EBnet.Stream. COFI is a conversation that is unfolding and is set to be promulgated early next year. And while some of us who are management committees think that this doesn't apply to us, I thought I'd reach out to Monique Cloete, who's the head of retirement fund solutions at Old Mutual Corporate, and catch up with a little bit more of her knowledge on COFI and how it impacts particularly umbrella funds, but perhaps beyond that as well. So welcome to EBnet.Stream, Monique.
Thank you very much, Nathalie, and thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And apologies, I think I called you the head of retirement fund solutions, but you're actually the head of group retirement solutions.
That's correct.
And that's important because it talks to the scope of what you know and the applicability of COFI. So I did want to correct that. So before we get into it, let's start with this concept of an umbrella fund and management committees or joint forums. Is it at this point a legal requirement to have a joint forum representing an employer or a participating employer in a commercial umbrella fund?
So, Nathalie, at this stage, strictly there is no legal requirement to have a management committee or joint forum representing the employer. It is very widely practiced in the industry already. So there are a number of employers who have put together their management committees. It is viewed as best practice, but strictly not legislated and strongly encouraged by industry, I think, as well. And you'll find often that it's your larger employers who put together a management committee. Your smaller employers tend to not have as much time to actually allocate to that.
So we know that this committee isn't legislated, okay? Does COFI not, in your opinion, change some of that?
So I think I must start off with a caveat to say we don't know what we don't know, right? So the last version we have of COFI doesn't seem to indicate that it would be legislated. I'm not finding that. We also are not, we're aware that there should be another version of COFI that's going to be shared with industry. I believe it's early in 2026 is the sort of timelines that I've got in mind. But at this stage, not being legislated, I think what it does bring to the table, though, is COFI sort of looks at how are we treating our customers fairly. So it's starting to legislate TCF principles, which have in the past been best practice. And what it's now going to do is it's going to request boards to actually ensure that they can prove they've taken account of the TCF principles. So the first thing that COFI is wanting to do is to standardize it across industry. So it's been quite fragmented. So let's standardize across industry that every customer of a financial institution is now being treated fairly in the same way, with the same principles. And then I think for boards, it now means that the board has to actually prove that they have taken account of the TCF principles in their decision making, in accepting changes to product, in introducing advice into their products and so forth.
So that's interesting because an umbrella fund has almost a disconnection where you have a professional board or independent professional trustees who sit very much removed and above the participating employers, who then are a level between the fund and its members. And so I'll swing back to the point of COFI, in my opinion, does start. I mean, I know it doesn't legislate it, but it does make it easier. Yeah. Let's put it that way. It does facilitate a management committee being in place for the board to comfort themselves that TCF is being embedded.
Very definitely. And to look after those specific members for that employer group. We all, in commercial umbrella funds, every employer has very different circumstances, very different industries they're coming from, the demographics are different and so forth. So it does COFI, as much as it's the mancos are not legislated, it does also talk to ensuring that as we're running funds, it is not to the letter of the law, it is within the spirit of the law. And I think that's where that openness to a manco starts to come from, and also gives them the opportunity to really bring the member to the forefront. As you've mentioned, there's quite a bit of distance. The Board of Trustees is quite far removed. And in some of my experience in the past, you found that particularly in an umbrella fund, the employer wants to be a little bit more involved in things that are happening for their members. Particularly, I have experienced it in the area of death claims, where the Board of Trustees is quite far removed from that member and their financial circumstances, their family circumstances, and so forth. And the employer wants to be able to have a bit of input into that. So that may be an area where we find that boards may be more open to say, can I have some input from the employer or from a manco representing that employer? That does mean that the manco is going to need to ensure that they have the necessary skills, that they have the necessary qualifications, etc., to be able to support the board in that way. Because ultimately the board must trust that the information they're getting is coming from a quality source, because ultimately they're going to carry the fiduciary responsibility for their decisions.
So you've already touched on one responsibility of a management committee member or joint forum, and that is death claims, which is what we all see. The employer is typically the closest to the deceased member, and so it forms really the first point of contact for information. But in your opinion, and this doesn't necessarily need to be specific to Old Mutual's commercial umbrella fund, super fund, but in your opinion, what other roles and responsibilities would a management committee have?
So what we could find is that where the management committee looks after the employer specifically, they would need to be able to almost give information back to the employer or advise the employer on whether the contribution rates are sufficient to provide good outcomes for the members. That's often a very fine balance, because the manco is made up of members and employer representatives in most cases. So it's quite a fine balance with regards to affordability from the employer and ensuring that the member is looked after from a contribution perspective, so that they need to be providing information back to employers. Also, any changes in benefit options, because the employer and their manco have the best understanding of, for example, the demographics within their employee group and the needs of their employees as well. So the manco, I think, would go back to the employer and give recommendations on the best way to structure the benefits for their members, so that it gives the member the benefits they need, not necessarily just standard benefits that the industry normally offers, but actually tailoring what those members' needs are. So I think there's a very important role for them to play there. Often the manco would also be the port of call for things like communication from the fund going back to the employer. So, back in the day, I'm giving my age away a little bit. Back in the day, we used to print benefit statements and deliver boxes. So in those days, that would have landed with an employer officer to distribute and so forth. And we know that in some instances that didn't quite happen the way we expected. But even in today's world, so when we do things like member webinars, actually giving members the time, making it available in a work environment, for example, where members don't have access to laptops to attend a webinar. Maybe it's creating that space in the employer's environment for members to still be able to watch a webinar, to get that level of information and so forth. So I think the manco can help in playing that role as well. And then I think very definitely in the oversight of how the employer now behaves with regards to the fund. And there I'm specifically talking about Section 13A. So under COFI, employers, from what we know at the moment, employers are going to become supervised entities with regards to Section 13A compliance. And that's quite a big change from where we are, because it gives the FSCA authority essentially to monitor that employer and their behavior with regards to Section 13A.
EBnet is proud to bring you top quality content from experts across the financial services industry in South Africa and internationally for free. Your support helps us in doing this. All we ask is that you subscribe to our channel by clicking the subscribe button below. Share this video with others you think will benefit from it, and give us a thumbs up if you're enjoying the content. That way you help us help you. Thank you from the team at EBnet. For more great content, please visit www.EBnet.co.za.
So, look, that's a big statement, and it's a big responsibility, the 13A ambit. And it's funny because as you were talking, you almost changed my perspective. In fact, I think you have changed my perspective. I thought, sure, the management committee then becomes responsible for the 13A monitoring and compliance, but it's actually the management committee who monitors the employer.
That's right.
In that instance. And so you've changed my perspective on that.
That's how I see it, Natalie. Because it's essentially the employer and not the committee set up by the employer who becomes that supervised entity. So I would have thought the management committee now needs to monitor, is the employer paying those contributions timeously? Because that's what a board would have done, or that's what a board would do today as well in an employer-sponsored fund. The board would be able to go back to the employer and say, but you're not paying your contributions on time, etc. Yeah, so I see that as a Manco responsibility going forward. Even though there is a responsible person who is appointed, yes, I think the Manco has that responsibility to monitor that from an employer perspective.
So you've talked about a lot of responsibilities for a management committee, and I don't want to use the word responsibilities because they are almost decent things to do if you're offering an umbrella, a retirement fund to your staff. You know, the kind of facilitative roles that need to be done to make sure that members can get the most out of these types of benefits. So you almost become a champion of the retirement fund structure within your employer. Does the Board of Trustees delegate some of their responsibility to the management committee? Or and my real question is if I'm starting to be responsible for some sort of decision making, particularly around a death claim, for example, or choosing an investment strategy, am I then as a management committee person also accepting some level of liability on that?
So I think when the board, if the board does delegate anything, firstly, they've got to reduce it to writing. That's what it seems like. Everything is sort of mandate driven, it looks like. And I think even if the board does delegate that responsibility, they never abdicate their own responsibility to still apply their minds. So I wouldn't think that liability lays with the Manco. I think it's important for the Manco to have the necessary skills to provide input to the board. I don't see that liability passing over just yet. Yeah, I'm not seeing that come through. I think the board would then still have the responsibility to say, this is what I've received, does it make sense? And not simply to follow what the Manco has presented to them. They still need to apply their unfettered discretion to that, in my view. Yeah.
Okay, so it really, if I were to think about it like a kind of a champion committee who really brings to life these benefits for an employer's staff and what it covers them for, and really makes it something positive in their world. I don't think that's a completely wrong way of looking at a management committee. And certainly if we look at kind of COFI, and you mentioned it earlier, the kind of principles-based perspective that COFI is, it kind of fits quite neatly into that.
It does. And I think that the management committee also, when it comes to, if they have that power mandated to them by the employer, for example, the employer is now deciding to go and join a new fund or to review the market, yes, for example, then the Manco would be the group that goes out and actually has a look at what is on offer in the market. They need to bring in those TCF principles that come out of COFI in terms of what does the product look like? Does it meet our members' needs? How is it structured? Does it align to the type of members we have? And then go back to the employer and say, this is our recommendation. That's how I see the role of the Manco playing out there, because it really is about the member outcome. It's about ensuring, and also them taking a view around the risks for the member. Sure. That are embedded in that process as well. And how do we, as a Manco, ensure that all the risks have been mitigated when we go out and look for a new service provider, for example?
Okay. Okay. So I'm with you now. So we've got a board of trustees and a management committee and an employer. COFI most definitely applies to the fund and its board of trustees.
Yes.
So that there must be a level of influence then than a management committee. We always think about management committees looking after sub-funds, employees and their members, but there must be a degree of influence that management committees can then exert upwards onto the independent or onto the professional board of trustees. I mean, what are your thoughts around that? And is there a responsibility on the management committees to exert that influence? And let's talk specifically around something like impact investing or ESG investing, something like that, where management committees can exert that influence. I mean, are you expecting that to increase?
So very definitely, I think there will be additional pressure. You could, if you take a look around industry, you're already seeing it happen. We've seen some of the matters that COFI will be addressing coming out in the cybersecurity standards that were recently issued. And you could very definitely see Manco starting to push back on that. So I expect that to be increased going forward, and not just around that one particular area. Very definitely around investments and what is on offer out of a commercial umbrella fund, the way the fund is run. Yes. I expect Mancos would want to step up and be very visible in that area. And where you would historically not have had as much pressure coming, I definitely think there's a bigger responsibility on the board, and the Manco is going to expect the board to comply and to feed that back to them. So I agree with you. I expect more action from the Mancos going forward.
Action's a good word. I was going to say much more dynamic conversation, but I prefer your word. action as opposed to reaction. Where suddenly they kind of step up and start influencing upwards. We are running out of time, and I can see I'm running over my time with you, but one last question, if I may. Sure. What in your opinion, just to round out our conversation, Monique, what in your opinion should management committees be doing now in anticipation for COFI landing in 2026? And I'm comfortable if the answer is nothing, but kind of what should they be thinking about?
So, Natalie, I think what Mancos can start looking at is understanding what COFI means, understanding the requirements in COFI, and then also how's that going to translate so that it impacts their members? What would that impact be? I think it's important for Mancos to follow that trail of thought and then start putting together what their plan is. How are they going to ensure that the fund that they participate in is actually complying with the COFI principle, with COFI? Are they seeing the principles starting to filter through in communication that they're getting, in the behavior of the fund and its board? Are they seeing things like risk management being managed well? So I think it'll probably, in my view, it's probably going to be the management committee expecting more reporting back from the board. Sure. That's how I expected to see it play out. But I would expect if I was sitting on a Manco today, I would be looking at what are the requirements going to be? How am I going to ask the board to meet my needs in terms of reporting back to me?
Monique, it's been an absolute pleasure catching up with you this morning. Thank you. I know this is a conversation we will follow up in the future again. And I really appreciate your insights. You've changed my perspective on a couple of things, and I really appreciate that. So thank you for taking the time with the EBnet.Stream today.
It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you, Nathalie, and thanks again for having me. I appreciate your time.
Keep well.
Thanks. Bye-bye.